Julian, calling your album and calling a song Saint Julian strikes me as possibly a comment, a humorous comment about some other people who are in your business who might genuinely see themselves as messianic cult figures, be they, well, I'll let you mention their names, but I wonder if that was at the back of your mind, that you're aware that actually you do, whether you like it or not, attract that kind of following.
Yeah, I do. You can either appreciate or be utterly grossed out by it. I actually do both. You know, I do court it sometimes. It's a tremendous position to be in when people come to your door and they say, oh, we've been travelling for 10 hours. Sorry. And I like the fact that they've made all that effort in it, but they're still a bit freaked out about the way that I'm going to react. And a lot of the time I do put the drawbridge up and become Julian Cope, the one that they didn't want to see.
What do they want from you? Do they want simply to touch the hem of your garment, or are they looking for words of wisdom?
I have no idea. I really haven't got a clue. It never occurred to me as a kid to ever consider talking to people. I used to be a massive fan of John Cale. I go and see him. I remember seeing him at Birmingham Repertory Theatre. It never occurred to me to ever say hello to him. It would have been, as far as I was concerned as a 15-year-old, it would have been enough that he didn't beat me up. You know, you still got a lot of people presuming a hell of a lot. The way that I see St. Julian is ironic, but at the same time, it's one of those things that, even if you don't see it ironically, it works quite well. The way I see a lot of musicians, the way I see the whole Alarm U2 stadium thing is very glorious. It's very flag waving. It's very follow me and I will lead you, I will lead you to the light. The way I see St. Julian is very vainglorious. It's preposterous. It's got to be preposterous. There's a song on the album called Planet Ride, which is very much a case of this guy wanting to leave what he's got, leave civilization, leave his home. He grabs his girl, he goes off in this big spaceship, flies around for a while, and she's complaining. She says, get me back. And he lands in this Garden of Eden. And he goes, all right, this is fantastic. And she's complaining. She rushes off and she goes to the top of the hill. And he rushes up behind her and she's smiling. And he gets to the top of the hill. And the reason she's smiling is because on the other side of the hill, she can see Sheffield. And the first time I ever saw Sheffield was like that. You come over this beautiful hill, and there, it's like walking into Mordor or something like that. Real Lord of the Rings stuff. And you think, this is how bad mankind can get.
But do you think that people often miss your sense of humour?
Yeah, I guess so. I've always believed that if you've got a sense of humour in it, and the music only works if you know that there's a sense of humour behind it, then you've failed. They've got to work in any situation. And that's what I've always liked about calling it pop music, by devaluing it and just calling it pop music. It is a commercial art. It's a commercial art the way Shakespeare was making commercial art. You could either consider that he was making fantastic writings and was always going to be revered in the future, or you could consider him to be a Tudor sycophant who was saying, well, we've heard about this and we've heard about that, but can you make Richard III a hunchback, please? It's a political move. And when people say, well, we're not doing our single on the tube because that's a cop-out, because we're artists, then I always say, why are you asking for £75,000 advance? I like that. I like the fact that there's an A&R man telling you to get off your trip every so often. Because if you're really going to fight, you're going to fight that guy and you're going to make him understand. And you get so many people who get to about 50 and nobody has said no to them since they were like 25. And they are just out to lunch. And I don't want to be like that. I don't want to be what I always term as being old prick. Because old prick is the guy who used to have wonderful sex. He's the guy who used to be so incredibly idealistic. But when it started to go, it went in such a big way. that he'll never get it back. You know, he's the kind of person who is a real bore, who will he won't give you your ball back. You know, it's that kind of image, and I don't want to be like that. I don't want everybody always saying yes, Julian, yes, Julian. That is just real rubbish.
From St. Julian, that's Julian Cope and Space Hopper. Julian, you were talking about people coming to visit you, and unlike the traditional pop star who lives in, I don't know, Greenwich Village or Beverly Hills, you live in Tamworth in the English West Midlands. Not a very famous place. What sort of a life do you lead when you're not being a pop star?
Homey. Quite pastoral. I mean, I do wake up to cock-a-doodle-doo every morning. It's very pretty where we live. You know, Tamworth is absolutely nowhere. I've actually started putting Tamworth, England on the logo, the Julian Cope logo. We use the bear and the ragged staff, which is the Warwickshire image. It also alludes to me and the mic stand, which I thought was quite neat. Tamworth is the kind of place where if you couldn't leave it, you'd go out of your mind. But as a place to go back to, it's fantastic. It actually has made me enjoy London more. I've been down in London for a while now, and I'm at peace with London. When I get back to Tamworth, there's so much naivety there, and I used to be quite incredulous that this went on, but then again, you have to accept that that is what your average person is like. Your average person does not travel, does have dreams that are within, you know, our grasp, and you have to realise that it's a very, very lucky position to be in. You know, we had a friend who flew in, who'd been recording in Berlin, so I rung up my taxi company in Tamworth that I always use, and I said, give me a quote for Heathrow. So the guy said, £45. I said, okay. And it's 110 miles. And he was supposed to meet him at 7 o'clock. So at 1 o'clock, I remembered that I got more information to give him. So I rung up. I said, oh, by the way, the guy who's going to pick my friend up from Heathrow, can you tell him this and this and this? Oh, he's left. I said, well, it's only 110 miles. He said, oh, yeah, but he hasn't been to London since 1966, so he decided that he'd have a sleep on the motorway. And it's that kind of place. And I can only adore a place like that.
I think you like that kind of naivety, almost childlike quality in people, and I think you like that part of your own character. And I wonder whether your famous collection of toy cars isn't an example of that.
It may be. I get tremendous joy out of childhood. I think the strange thing with childhood is that around about the age of 15, 14, 15, as you're discovering sex, and you're discovering that there are guitars and there's music and stuff like that, you get a real downer on your childhood. And you not only say, I never had toys, but you find all those toys that you did have and you systematically destroy them all. When I was about 22, when I destroyed all my toys, I realised that what I was doing, the business that I was doing, was a real childish thing, because it isn't a real world, you know. I don't think I've ever checked into a hotel more than 3 times in my life on my own. You know, people do it for you. So you either embrace that side of it, which is what I do, or you just become completely unaware of it, and you think that that's the way everybody lives. And if you think that's the way everybody lives, then you're a fool, and you're on the way, you know, to vacant land. And with toys, I had a tremendous sense of atmosphere. I remember getting a model of a Porsche Carrera in 1967, and I opened it in Truro when we were on holiday. Now, I'd forgotten about that until 2 years ago. I went into a shop, and they had one in its box. And I said, how much is this? And the guy said, £8. Now, most people say, well, I paid 3 and 6 for that. I'm not paying £8. But to me, it's like somebody has had your past, and they rent it out to you. You know, they keep it in store, and they say, well, I'll store this, and you've got to pay a little bit every month, and I'll keep it perfect. So I bought it, opened it up, and the mere act of opening up that box is like it opens up every memory from that period. And childhood is like that. I sometimes look at kids if I'm in a taxi or if I'm on a bus, and I look at a kid and I'm looking at the same thing that that kid's looking at, and I see all the misconceptions in his eyes, and I think it's fantastic. You know, those kind of misconceptions are the things that just make the world a wonderful place. I'm not going to rush to be cynical. I mean, a lot of the time I find forced naivety a bit gross. You know, there's such a difference between naivety and innocence. I can't force it. The first time my wife ever met me, she said the thing she liked most about me was that I walked out on stage and I had my hands in my mouth and looked utterly bewildered. But the one thing that I did not do was I never ever walked on stage again with my hands in my mouth looking utterly bewildered, because that would have been forced naivety. That would have been gross, you know. You've got to be trying to progress, even if you don't.
Moving back to the music, you were talking about your Porsche Carrera in 1967. Seems to me that you have an affection for the 60s, for the music particularly of the late 60s. There's a track on St. Julian called Eve's Volcano, and it sounds like it might have almost been written by a San Francisco band of that era. Was that a conscious plan?
No. To be honest, I actually try and make things as un-60s as possible. But I'm obviously a child of that. There's nothing that you can do about it. The reason that people are more aware of things like that is because there are less people doing that. With something like, say, the Style Council, nobody's ever going to say, well, it's very 60s soul, because there's a million people doing 60s soul. The psychedelic, chemically induced period is a period of great embarrassment for a lot of people, because it's basically middle-class white people freaking out and being tremendously embarrassing. That is actually what appeals to me, the fact that it was a very embarrassing time. It was everybody thinking the potential of the world is a lot more than we ever thought. I'm glad that I didn't live in the 60s, because my opinion of what it's like suggests to me that it was a lot cooler than it really was. I like to be able to look back. I think that makes it a lot better. It would have been very, very hard. You know, I can remember being a punk in 76, 77, and it wasn't good getting beaten up all the time. So I can imagine what it was like being a hippie, you know? Although I'm quite romantic, I think I'm quite realistic as well when you know, I'm not going to say, oh, the 60s, yeah, what a fantastic time. The music that came out was brilliant. The imagery that came out and the art that came out was brilliant. But I'm glad a lot of other people went through the crap rather than me.
Let's hear the song Eve's Volcano. From St. Julian, Julian Cope, Eve's Volcano. Julian, when the LP comes out, I'm sure you'll be on the road plugging it around the world. The first thing that people are going to notice when they come to see you is this extraordinary sort of scaffolding that you climb on. It's a microphone stand, but it looks like it belongs in a gymnasium or perhaps in a circus. Whose idea was that?
It was kind of enforced, really. I've got a habit of smashing mic stands up, and we smashed 7 on one tour, and Callie, my manager, said financial considerations mean you need a heavy-duty mic stand. As we started to build it, the possibilities seemed more. I'd always been in love with the microphone. It always has a certain kind of, I don't know, addressing the microphone is a very kind of sexual thing. And as we started to build it, I realized that it could be anything. It could be an altar, it could be, you know, this ridiculous phallic symbol, it could be a lectern, and it could be, you know, I could be just a monkey on a pole. You throw a shape on that mic stand, and it looks good. Even if it looks crazed, it looks good. And there's something about it that means I don't have to make a fool of myself on the rest of the stage. Needless to say, I still do occasionally make a fool of myself. But whenever I used to see films of groups like Led Zeppelin, it would come to the instrumental part, and Robert Plant would stand there And apart from being an air guitarist for 5 minutes, after a while he would get fed up with twizzling his hands around, and he'd just look uncomfortable. And sometimes we go into really long instrumentals, and there's nothing better than just standing on the mic stand, hanging off it, just looking into the audience and thinking, all right, this music's great. You don't have to do anything, you just stand there.
You like working in the audience, don't you? I don't think you're one of these people who feels that the audience are a necessary encumbrance to being basically a record maker. I get the impression that you enjoy the idea of going out there and giving them a good time.
I think I am a performer. You know, I've had periods of being an appalling performer, but a lot of people seem to think in music, in rock music, that all the trappings are the main things. They think that the drug taking is exciting. They think that groupies are there to have sex with. They think that if the bus that you arrive at the gig in is not impressive enough, then it's going to ruin the gig. I get on stage and I love girls being at the front. I love the hippies at the back. I love all these people on their own weird trip. But it's never really struck me that groupies are there to have sex with. Groupies are there because it's a great feeling. And when I'm on stage, that's the performance. And it's a bit like, the easiest way to describe it is, for a long while, I used to feel very horny on stage. But I found it very difficult to transmit that horniness into sexiness. Now, you can stand there and be horny and nobody will know, because they just said, who's this dude, you know. But to actually channel that all into projection is a really difficult thing to do. And you've got to feel this is your stage. And so the show just becomes everything. And yeah, occasionally I do feel uncomfortable. But a lot of the time I feel very, very euphoric. I want to give the audience everything. You know, I used to cut myself, I used to smear myself, I used to fall off things in my effort to give the audience something. I would fail in the biggest way. I'd rather not fail, but I would rather fail if it means that it was because I was trying to give an audience everything.
Let's hear this final track that we're playing, which is Shot Down. Tell me before we hear this though, how you made the record, because it has in places a very lively sound. It sounds quite spontaneous, and yet it's taken you a very long time to make it.
I think the longer that it took, the more perfection we were aiming for, and the perfection that I was aiming for was a kind of aliveness, and that's very difficult. There's certain things where it's so guitar-y that Donald's guitar has to have so much control. You've ended up got 16 tracks of guitar. So something like Shot Down, we did the drums and bass second take. But then you have to be so careful. You get a wonderful drum sound, you get a wonderful bass sound. You have to be so careful where you're placing things. You know, something like Shot Down is just a groove, and if you just let things spill out all over the place, especially with today's technology, you're going to get an awful result. And this is the first time that I've really worked on songs where I've honed them down to be as short as they can be, and I've given Donald, say, where I would used to give him 16 bars for a solo, I say, you got 4 bars, impress me. And that's the way that it should be. It's a very exciting way of working. You know, a lot of people say, oh yeah, but recording's really boring. Recording isn't boring. Recording's the way you do everything. Some people are not able to hang out. They're not able to hang out unless they're at a club. You know, I mean, like, we're hanging out now. A lot of people say, what do you do? I hang out. And I think hanging out is such a great phrase, because it's like going into the studio. You write the song in this euphoria, and then you just throw it against the wall and you see how much of it is actually good. But then you've got to be very brutal with it. You've got to say, okay, I wrote this in euphoria. Now I've got to make this song appeal to people. I've got to actually transmit it to people. So when I'm doing vocals, a lot of the time, all I'm doing is making something perfect that I wrote 6 months ago. So like you get on your own trip, you know, this time I've been standing on a Leslie cabinet with the microphone stand very, very high with a Christmas tree in front of me, and it's the only way that I can get into it. You know, you stand up there and you feel really snotty, and you know, I feel like Bono or something up there, you know, and you're making faces at the producer and stuff, and you're actually doing something by imbuing that recording period with a bit of a special air. It actually, I really believe it transmits onto the record.
Julian Cab, thank you.